Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about programming languages. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, what programming language can I use to run a 50 million member social media platform? All of them. You think 50 million sounds like a lot, and it's a lot of people, but in computation terms, that's nothing. Unless you do something that is very, very significant. And checking your website, I mean, if you do, like, even if all 50 million of them are using the system at the same time, a social media platform of 50 million users is really not an issue for a modern day cloud setup. Like, it is really not. And the computation part really comes down to how much cost are you willing to take on versus how much do you like working in your specific programming language. If you don't know that, for example, there are today, well, they started moving over to Scala, but Twitter was using Ruby, I think, for quite a long time. I've worked for one of the largest companies in the world in the when it comes to, well, I mean, not in the it's a gigantic corporation that has millions and millions and millions and millions of users every single day, and they were running everything on PHP. So when it comes to programming language and performance and things like that, it's really not a number where you need to care all that much, unless you're dealing with a very high intensity of load, which is usually not something where you need to think about it from the perspective of, I have all of these systems and I have to optimize all of them. So one of the things that which is a very good idea, at least in my opinion, is to so I've said on a few occasions that microservices is not a good default for a small scale system, and the reason being because it makes more sense for you to grow into microservices than it ever is going to be usually to start out with it, because if you start out with it, you're paying an upfront cost. But what I do recommend is to think in terms of modules. And the pattern that I'm a very big fan of modularizing all your code, and I even go as far as to say that if you're using microservices to segment your code, then you're doing it wrong. You're doing it really, really wrong. And the beautiful part about because the thing is, there is a use case for microservices, and this is where it becomes more apparent to you. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you do have a use case where you actually do need to optimize for a very performant programming language because for some reason I don't know, let's say you do image processing or something like that, which is could potentially be a heavy operation or something like that, and you want to optimize that as much as possible. Well, let's say that you're on Ruby or Python or something, that doesn't really matter, and you're not seeing the numbers that you want, and you see that actually it's not possible for you to just add more boxes to handle more requests, because the problem isn't the amount of boxes you have. The problem is the execution speed of the process that you're kicking off when someone makes a request. Well, in that scenario, if you have modularized your code, in other words, it's segmented to the point where you can lift logic out, you don't really have a problem, because what now happens is that you can take the module of code that has the need to do this very heavy computation and move that into a microservice. And now the only part of the system that needs to be written in this very optimized language, such as, let's say that you by today's standards, I would say Rust would be an example, or Go or something like that, which would be considered one of the most performant languages that you could get. But that doesn't mean that you want to write your entire system in, say, Rust. An example of a very good setup would have been, let's say that you want to go for maximum hireability for your system, which basically means you can find as many people as possible. Say that you went with Java as the default, as your standard language. That means that literally everything that is not requiring that high peak performance in terms of computation power is written in Java, and you're going to gain the benefit of being able to hire as many people as you want. You're going to be able to use all the libraries, like all of this stuff is going to sort of be handed to you. But for the one part that is really critical in terms of performance, you can simply move that outside of like the rest of this ecosystem and create a microservice for it and write that in Rust. And then you can make sure that that thing is very performant. If you think in those terms, then because this is how you structure a sane system, as opposed to saying I'm going to write everything in Rust, because the reality is that saying that you're going to do it for everything is actually not, it's not very effective. You're not going to gain much unless, as I said, like it really is a trade-off. I mean, I'm not saying that Rust can't be the default or like some other language, but it's the same thing for C or C++ or something like that. These languages might not be the best choice if you're looking to balance the fact that you need to find people who are comfortable working in this way. You want to make sure that they're productive. You want to make sure that there's an ecosystem of tools around them so they don't have to do a lot of manual things. They have an easier time developing your system and that's okay. That's an okay trade-off when you don't need peak performance for the entire system, because you're not going to, I promise you. It might not make a lot of sense, but on the other hand, on average, if you have, say, a need for higher performances or so forth, then sure, you can absolutely make a case for using a performant language, but I would say that unless you're really stretching it, 50 million people is never going to get you to that point usually, where you're going to have to optimize an entire system after a specific programming language just so you can deal with all those 50 million. The reality is that you can probably pick any language you want, and as I said, simply segment out. It's sort of, in a sense, it is like doing performance optimization. It's better for you to start with a reasonable default, something that has that balance between productivity and performance, which is practically all of them, and then figure out where the bottlenecks of performance are. And if you've done everything right and you follow my rules that I say, like write disposable code, then changing your system and moving out some part, like a module that actually does the heavy computation, is a done deal. It's not going to be a problem whatsoever. So what I want you to take away from this is that you can use practically any programming language. I would say anyone. For 50 million social media platform with 50 million users. It sounds like a big number, but it is not a big number. It's not a number where you're going to have an issue with load, unless, as I said, you have this sort of spiky traffic, which incidentally is a system that I've been working on. And when you have that level, like, guys, I can tell you right now, if you have enough of a spike, which some systems have, where the spike is literally there's no traffic whatsoever, and then within a fraction of a second it shoots up to millions of requests because you're either selling tickets, you're betting, or something like that, where people are going, like there is a release date or something like that, where everybody tries to rush to the system at the same time. There is not a single programming language on this planet that's going to fix that for you. It does not matter what you write it in, because even if you were to, you can't even autoscale that effectively, or it's going to be very difficult for you. You can autoscale it, but if you're going to go into these sorts of issues, then we need to have a different video. I can tell you how we did it, and it was actually a very nice way, I think, to solving the problem. But 50 million users that are every so often uploading a picture or a video or watching something on YouTube, like most of them are just consuming content. It's not something you have to worry about. You can pick your favorite language, it doesn't matter which one it is. And as I said, if you find that there are specific things, that requests that take longer, that is causing your system to slow down, you can move into a microservices architecture and move out the things that needs to be very performant into a subsegment of the system. Have a great day.